Now, I don't know what you made of Boris Johnson's zoomed-in Prime Minister's questions yesterday, but, I mean, he was standing with a very, very sort of pale background, looking very pale, not particularly well, and with a connection that we've had better on this actual radio station. So, I mean, as the Prime Minister of the nation, somebody who's constantly pushing out how we're going to be at the very forefront of technological expertise and we're going to have 5G all over the country sooner rather than later, you'd think that his technical people in Downing Street would have made a slightly better job of presenting him to the world. Today, he's going to do it again at midday, and we'll be bringing you a bit of that. But let's see. We're only going to really check in with it to make sure that he's actually got a better connection than he had yesterday. Maybe he should try Skype, or maybe he should try FaceTime. Maybe that would be easier. I don't know. But I think we ought to really expect the Prime Minister to have the absolute top 10 out of 10 technological expertise, don't you? Isn't that what we deserve? Especially since he's spending another £16 billion of our money on a load of cyber security. All very well for him, you might say. Let's talk to William Clouston, leader of the Social Democratic Party. He's the only man, as far as we know, aside from the soon-to-be Reform UK Party, which is anti-lockdown and very much, I presume, pro-Christmas. William, a very good morning to you.
Morning, great to be back.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I mean, I wasn't just buttering you up when I said that you were a voice of calm and sanity in these crazy times, because they are indeed crazy, and you are indeed sane. So tell us what you think of what's going on.
Well, it's been, I mean, this has been going on, since March, really. What can we say? I mean, the basic situation is we've had stop-go from the government and sharp turns, but we're also learning lessons, aren't we? Because a basic lesson is that if you ask a reasonable request of the public, the request will probably be honoured. But if you don't, if you ask something which is unreasonable, eventually you'll get defiance. And I think we're at the stage now where after the first lockdown was honoured spectacularly and in a great spirit of public spirit and solidarity, and as a one-off, that's fine. I think people would accept that. We supported the first lockdown, but as we've gone on, the sharp turns and the getting people back, and then giving incoherent advice to businesses and families and so on, people are their patience is wearing thin.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. And this latest kind of nonsense about Christmas really has, I think, upset quite a few people. I mean, there will be those, and I've seen them, as I'm sure you have, William, on social media saying, we're shielding, we've got very, unwell relatives, we've got people who are very vulnerable, we don't want there to be Christmas. Well, fine, if you don't want to have a big Christmas party, then don't have one. Nobody's forcing anybody to do anything. But for the government to come out, and I don't know, as I say, I don't know where Professor Whitty has disappeared to, but for this woman, Susan Hopkins, to come out and sort of grant us 2 days, which later became 5 days of punishment for every 1 day of freedom. I mean, it's quite ludicrous, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, and again, what they're missing is that they're losing out on the goodwill and personal responsibility. There can't be anyone in this jurisdiction, in this kingdom, that isn't aware that we're suffering a viral pandemic and that older people are more vulnerable. Everyone understands that.
Yeah,
and therefore,
including, by the way, the old and vulnerable.
Yes, and absolutely. And any family group that decides to get together at Christmas is aware of that. What we're facing is a sort of moral panic about risk. And this has been going on from the start. There's risk involved in absolutely everything. If certain families decide not to have a communal family Christmas, then fine. It might be very sensible in certain circumstances. But if others decide to get together, possibly for the last time, you've got to remember that as well, then that is their choice. I think the government really has the response. I mean, I've said before that I think what we're witnessing is a synchronised giant policy error. And outside of war, I think it's probably the biggest global policy area we will see. I mean, remember, bad as it's been with all the effects of the lockdowns and so on and the disruption to people's lives and the deaths we've had, not just from COVID, from other things, because the NHS capacity has been affected to treat anyone else for anything else. But really, the long-term tail effects, the long-term effects are just going to start. And I've said before, insolvency practitioners and other people are going to get together, unemployment's going to rise. And if you just look at the figures produced by the National Audit Office on their cost of COVID tracker, effectively, you're into hundreds and hundreds of billions. Already, the cost of this society is far greater than the global financial crisis in '08.
Yeah, exactly right. And when you see the kind of problems that the government is creating, not just for themselves, but also for an awful lot of businesses because of the uncertainty, that's a massive thing at this time of the year. Because I've spoken to a lot of independent traders who say, look, you know, yes, November is massive for us, and we're sorry that we haven't been able to trade during that month. But if we can at least catch up in December, that will be one thing. But what they don't know is whether they can do that. So none of them know whether they can order in the stock. None of them know whether they can actually, you know, make any provision for selling and making provision for hiring people to do that selling. And until and as such as the government actually says something definitive, they can't really make any plans.
No, they can't. And the tragic thing is that they've actually done everything the government hitherto has asked of them. That's the problem. I mean, basically in retail, the window, it is seasonal. And for most retail operations, the window is basically October, November, December,
right?
To make most of the profit for the year, and a lot of that's already been disrupted. But the tragic thing is that all of the shops have done what they've been asked. They've made the adaptations in store to make them safe, and then suddenly it's deemed that it's not safe, and they have to close down. But Mike, it's not just businesses. You know, in the community council I chair up here in Northumberland, we have a lot of community groups that use the community hall. We probably have something like 35 groups. Now, I really don't know how many of those groups are going to restart next year when we're in a position to start it up. So you're not talking about businesses, you're talking about film clubs, you know, bowls club, things like that, community groups that people rely on. And this interregnum, this break in their ability to do that, will actually reduce the number of groups we have, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely right. And also in general terms, William, you know, we still struggle, do we not, to get any answers out of this government as to whether the lockdowns are working, have worked, will work in the future, will continue to be kind of investigated through December, because we're told 2 or 3 different versions of events might happen. More than likely, I'm assuming, I don't know whether you agree, that we'll probably come out of this on December the 2nd into some kind of return to a tiered system, which seemed to be working reasonably well. I don't really understand why they had to change it.
Yeah, the government have a difficulty, as any policymaker would, with tail effects, obviously. I mean, certainly on the ONS website, you can see the 7-day moving average for the death rate in this country is starting to reduce, which is good news. So, you know, it is difficult from that point of view. But I think they're missing, often when we look at particular things, we're missing a much, much more important, bigger thing. And the problem from the start has been, the government's been, as a point I've made many times, the government's made policy from nerve tag and SAGE, but it hasn't had an equivalent committee or advice on the macro effects, the collateral damage and what it's doing, which I have no doubt is far, far more damaging. That's the problem. And so they've only actually had half of the advice.
Well, that's right. And they've actually kind of almost boasted about the fact that they haven't bothered to look into the economic effects, because why would you not? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to me at all.
It's grossly irresponsible. I mean, literally, it is grossly irresponsible to do what they're doing. You know, we've had analysis on quality adjusted life years and the cost of those for COVID deaths as opposed to others. Some of the analysis indicates literally inflation of that cost of something like, you know, 6,700%. I mean, it's what we're witnessing is, as I say, is a gigantic policy area. It is not rational to burden future generations and to steal effectively from our children and grandchildren to save a quality adjusted life year at a cost of £1 million now, when the tail effect of that on society going forward is colossal. And they're just not, it is grossly irresponsible. For some reason, the press has not deemed fit, you know, I mean, apart from pockets like the Specky and Telegraph and Spiked and others, there's been very, very little scrutiny. Certainly the BBC has done nothing to look into that. They've got this fact checker guy.
Yeah.
I'm afraid he hasn't been very good.
Yeah, well, perhaps he's gone over to Panorama to try and figure out what Martin Bashir was up to all those years ago. But I mean, you do wonder with some of the sort of the supine nature of the media. I mean, the Daily Mirror this morning, against a Tory government, right, has got a front page about Christmas and all of the rules that are going to be brought in, as if they have to be brought in, as if the rules are somehow, unassailable, and you can't argue about them because they are obviously the rules that we must do. And you just think, well, hang on a minute, they're literally making this stuff up as they go along. Susan Hopkins yesterday with this whole, is it 2 days, is it 5 days? I mean, there's no evidence that any of that is required. There is absolutely no suggestion that if you have some people round for dinner who happen to be members of your family and you happen to be reasonably careful about how you interact with one another, that you then need to lock yourselves away for 5 days.
Yeah, unfortunately, those of us that have been arguing for more policy stability and, basically a more stable environment generally, I'm afraid to say we're not going to be listened to. And the main reason for that is actually the good news of the vaccine efficacy. More and more vaccines are being produced, and obviously they appear to be effective. So from the government's point of view, I would say the prospect of them taking a proportionate and sensible view while we're still in the seasonality, the epidemic season, I would say is nil. And I would say to friends and society in general, I'm afraid we're in a damage limitation phase now, where we just have to see the government's approach out, probably till March or April, the best we can, and try and cling on to the infrastructure we have and keep it together. But they're not going to change now as they've got the pathway into the vaccine, which, as I say, is a good thing. And I think there's a reasonable prospect that mass vaccination could take place in the summer, and by next autumn we could be approaching a far rosier situation. Having said that, I have to bring one matter up. Parliament took advice from a number of lawyers in the summer about compulsory vaccination, and were looking at the legal background to that. And I have to say myself, I'm strongly against the idea of compulsory vaccination.
Well, I'd like to think everybody is, but unfortunately everybody isn't against it, because quite a lot of the members of the scientific community appear to be for it.
They are. Well, I think many of them are. Not all of them. I seem to remember talkRADIO interviewed a professor from Leeds who said when he was asked whether his children should get the vaccine, he sort of hesitated a little bit. So it's not unanimous.
No.
But in any case, I mean, the YouGov poll, I think it was yesterday or the day before, show very, very sizable minorities, 34%, against compulsory vaccination. And I just think from an embedded rights point of view, I'd be very, very concerned if the government starts looking at that. I mean, and well, they're clearly looking at it. I'd be very concerned if that happened.
Yeah, I can't imagine that they would in any way, shape or form try to push that through. But what worries me is that they're taking advice from some of these characters, these scientists who seem to be, as I've said before, so cautious that they would barely go out the front door if they didn't absolutely have to, because they think that they can somehow stop all risk in life. And as you've said before, William, risk is very much a part of life. We risk our lives every single day that we go and do anything. But these people would seem to want to have us all hide away in our houses, as Boris Johnson is currently doing, for no apparent reason, in order to somehow, make sure this virus doesn't do any harm. Well, I'm afraid you can't do that. It doesn't work.
No, and the Boris isolation thing is quite bizarre, isn't it? I mean, the poor chap nearly died. He on all evidence, he must have some immunity to it. In any case, people could distance from him. It seems a bit of an overreaction. I mean, again, I think what the problem we've had is expertise is particular, isn't it? The particular expertise of virologists and immunologists and so on is that, but it's not on the colossal collateral damage on a macro scale.
No. I read sorry, go on.
Yeah, Foreign Affairs had a piece, last month about the global food supply being affected by this, and they had they had thousands of people on their estimates dying of starvation as a result of this, and no one is talking about it.
No, of course not, because we still have many, many politicians and many of these kind of, what I regard as rather overcautious, quite often politically driven doctors, one of whom is Rachel Clark, who put out a tweet yesterday saying, another 529 COVID deaths just announced today. It goes on and on and on. A jumbo jet falling from the sky day after day after day. Well, what she doesn't say is that there's 2 other jumbo jets full of people falling from the sky who've died from other things. So, you know, it's completely irrelevant, no matter how much you want to frighten people. And I think these people should be stopped from doing it.
Yeah, and the sad thing is that, again, it's irresponsible because they're not taking the tail effect. Ask any macroeconomist. The tail effect of this, just financially, we're looking at something like, conservatively, something like £1 trillion hit to this economy. The tail effect of that will literally, it could be 10, 15, 20 years. And long, long after Ferguson and Matt Hancock and all the other people that have presided over this policy era and not listened to and have forgotten, services will be affected, people will be affected, opportunities to the young people will be curtailed, doors will slam shut. And that's what we've got to face. And they're not facing up to it. I do wish more people in the commentariat. I mean, I think you've done a brilliant job, but we're sort of crying in the wind, really, because this era has not been addressed, and it's vital it is.
Yeah, absolutely right. William, thank you very much indeed as ever for your time. William Clouston, leader of the Social Democratic Party, talking a great deal of sense about what the government isn't doing rather than what the government actually is doing. I mean, yesterday they were announcing their green industrial revolution. That seems to have gone by the wayside because today they've got another announcement, 16 billion quid for the military. I wonder what they're going to tell us tomorrow to try and take our minds off Christmas.